coffee, sir.
Thanks, beautiful.
You're welcome.
How can such a pretty wife make such bad coffee?
Yes, women workers do present problems, Joe. It's tough, I know, but there are thousands of others, just like you all over the country, facing the same problems.
What's wrong with her? She's a woman, isn't she?
Throughout the last century, women were pushed into a life that they could never feel satisfied with the sole expectation of getting married, having children, and performing household duties. Women's roles in society were unfulfilling and unfair. Yet, they were too afraid to speak up about their frustration with their monotonous lives. That was until The Feminine Mystique, a book which expressed these feelings which were once hidden behind closed doors. The book changed the lives of women all over the world, giving them opportunities to do what they want with their lives and push gender equality. This book was written by none other than Betty Friedan, and that's not all she accomplished in the least. Betty Goldstein was born and raised in the city of Peoria, Illinois in 1921 to her father, an owner of a jewelry store, and her stay-at-home mother. Her mother used to be a newspaper editor, but her career came to a halt upon marriage. As a female Jew, high school was difficult. She was a misfit amongst her peers. Still, Betty graduated high school as valedictorian and was accepted into the elite Smith College because of her accomplishments. She majored in psychology and graduated in 1942, but she loved newspapers and moved to New York to pursue her dreams as a reporter. She married Carl Friedan in 1947 and thereafter had 3 children. Unfortunately, she got fired after her second maternity leave. Friedan was now a restless housewife and soon began to find life very unsatisfying. She wondered if she was the only one who felt like she was in the wrong place. She surveyed her fellow graduates from Smith, which was an all-girls school, and discovered that she wasn't alone. She wrote her thoughts and frustrations in a book, naming it The Feminine Mystique, and published it 5 years later in 1967. The book scratched the myth that all women wanted to be housewives and encouraged women to seek opportunities outside their homes. To her surprise, the book got extremely popular. The response was huge.
I think for a female audience, it was finally somebody speaking the truth about our lives, and we've lived through 3 or 4 different eras over the past 2.5 decades. But I also think that the book came out and people were, I'm thinking of women readers, right, and saying, "Oh my God, she's so right. What do we do?"
She received thousands of letters from women who sympathized with her, many of them telling her that she had changed their lives. Her influence was so great that she sparked the beginning of the women's movement, a protest which would permanently alter and improve America as she knew it. Friedan was now a prominent feminist writer in the eyes of the United States, so she was invited to speak at the Third National Conference of Commissions on the Status of Women in 1966. The theme of the conference was Target for Action, but not as much was accomplished at the meeting as the attendees had wanted. Friedan, an experienced labor organizer prior to being an author, decided to invite these disappointed attendees to further discuss strategies to fight for gender equality. At this meeting, Friedan wrote the letters N-O-W on a napkin, and the name stuck. The National Organization for Women was founded by 28 feminists, including Friedan as its elected president. It gained 300 members by October, just 2 months after its foundation. It took a stand for a broad range of issues, including gender equality, pay equity, women's health, and rights to abortion. It took many of the first steps towards today's women's rights. In addition to now, Friedan created a group dedicated to a specific women's right, abortion. With the help of an abortion activist group, she founded the National Abortion Rights Action League in 1969. The group worked to convert the nation from pro-life to pro-choice, improve education on reproductive rights, and help pro-choice candidates in their elections.
And I think the controversy, right, is that the minute somebody says, hey, some people aren't happy, the people who have more power say, shut up.
Of course, when people told Friedan to shut up, she just spoke louder.
On behalf of the unprecedented coalition of women that today has called this strike to confront the unfinished business of our equality, women young and old, women black and white, women students, women grandmothers who fought for the original right to vote.
March of 1970, Friedan and the National Organization for Women worked with the National Women's Strike Coalition to organize a protest in New York City. But as word passed around, the local plan turned national.
So there was this mass of women pretty much at the boiling point, ready to get organized. And what Betty Friedan did, right, was that and her genius, I think, was understanding this.
On August 26, 1970, 50 years after the 19th Amendment was ratified, 50,000 women marched on Fifth Avenue in New York City. Others marched in LA, Detroit, DC, and New Orleans as well. The main goals of the protests were to universally legalize abortion and to establish equal opportunities in schools and the workplace, but it also recognized the racial divide and acceptance of the LGBT community.
But I think the women's strike, which was one of the most important, certainly at the time, and certainly historically, we can see it one of the most pivotal watershed moments for feminism, because it really said all women should engage in this and essentially stop the country for a day.
The strike was considered to be incredibly successful, as it received very significant direct results. 1972's Title IX prohibited gender discrimination in school, and the Equal Opportunity Commission made several policies against women's sexual harassment. Perhaps the most successful result relating to the protest was when the U.S. Supreme Court passed the 1973 Roe v. Wade, legalizing abortion in all 50 states. Because of Friedan and her many supporters, women were gaining more and more of the rights they long deserved and destroying the patriarchy piece by piece. Although the strike was a major success, the nation was not done pushing women's rights. So, naturally, neither was Friedan. In 1971, she founded the National Women's Political Caucus, with the help of fellow feminists Gloria Steinem, Bella Abzug, and Shirley Chisholm. 320 people joined the first meeting to support the idea. The caucus was determined to create a larger representation of women in the government to challenge the patriarchy. It funded campaigns for any feminist politicians and held conventions all over the U.S., such as the Win with Women campaign, which recruited, trained, and supported pro-choice candidates for local, state, and congressional office. While Friedan has been widely credited for starting an incredible movement and creating a world where women could finally stand up for themselves, some of her views were somewhat contentious. Writer Bell Hooks critiqued the feminine mystique, noting that it didn't address the issues Black women encountered. She explained that the problems Friedan faced were only relatable to white, upper-class women, not to the minorities who were facing much worse issues. Additionally, prior to the women's strike, Friedan had homophobic tendencies. She actually created the term lavender menace to describe lesbian feminists who she believed were plaguing the women's movement. Her beliefs on LGBT rights had since evolved, but her history is still there. However, these issues don't override her many accomplishments for women's rights, feminism, and the social structure of the United States. In 2006, on her 85th birthday, Betty Friedan passed away. She left behind a legacy of endless achievement. She fought for a monumental amount of justice for women. She bravely spoke against the deep-rooted sexism in the United States. She opened up many opportunities for women that were previously unimaginable. Betty Friedan created a society where girls from the past and present may strive for great achievement in life without being held back from doing so.
50 years ago